Folks, let me tell you about something incredible, something that's changing the game and how we think about podcasts. It's called Project Flux, and it's absolutely fantastic. This isn't just any podcast, it's a revolution in audio content. The insights, the discussions, the guests, all top-notch. The best, really.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 2 of the Project Flux podcast, and thank you for those tuning in again after our kickoff episode last week. This week we have the pleasure of being joined by Nicki Cons. Nicki Cons is a risk and project management expert and one of the 6 experts who helped write the risk guide for the PMI. So we're very, very lucky to have her on board, and we'll let her introduce herself in a minute. Before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone about a very important event next week on the 17th of April. That's the Wednesday at Gleader's headquarters. We have Karina Singh from the IPA coming to talk about the new government paper on AI and project delivery. So we'll put the link to the event in the show notes afterwards. Please sign up. We're getting very close to capacity, so if you want to come, don't delay and get yourself booked onto that, because it's going to be an absolutely brilliant evening. So Nicki, thank you so much for coming on. It is a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. We've known each other for a while now, and when we set up this podcast, you were one of the first people I thought would be brilliant to talk about some of the stories that come out from the world of AI and data analytics, because I know some of the incredible stuff that you've done and some of the books that you've published. You're a real expert in the field. Would you mind just giving the listeners a quick introduction about yourself and what you've been up to?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Yoshi and James, for having me on. That's really exciting. Yes, we've known each other for a while now, and in the context of actually AI in project management. So I first started to think about, I would say, I wouldn't call it AI, but a more statistical, data-oriented project management way of doing things back in, you would not believe this, way back in 2016 when I published my book, PVAR, Project Value at Risk, which is a different way of seeing it and doing things. Yeah. And so I run my risk consultancy that's called At Risk. And I actually, about a year ago, what's really exciting to share is I was going to start an project management AI startup. And I had a ton of ideas. Now, my problem was I had too many ideas. And so I couldn't decide, what I wanted to do. So I said, okay, let's see how things progress. So super excited to be on today.
That's brilliant. And the books that you've written, they're all available on Amazon and other bookshops. So we'll put the links to those up in the show notes for anyone to download. And well worth a read for anyone interested in project management or project risk. So thank you for being on. And we're going to run the same sort of format. Again, it's been a great week and almost too many stories to fit in. When I do the newsletter on the weekend, I'm honestly having to sort of edit stories because there's just still so much that's going on. No doubt that will kind of calm down. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was the kind of the week's top story, which was about these stats that have come out. And for anyone who wants to see the graph, you can we'll have the newsletter link in the show notes so you can go and have a look. But there was a bit of research that came out that showed that the adoption of ChatGPT at work is rising. This was an American study, but it said that it's jumping by about 12 percentage points since March 2023. So that's a sharp uptake. And I thought, that we've all got an idea that more and more people are starting to experiment and use ChatGPT and other large language models at work. But to have this kind of stat come out proving that this is actually the case, at least in America, and I'm sure it will be similar in other territories, kind of makes me realize that this exponential kind of growth that we've been talking about is actually happening. So start with you, Nicki. What do you think? Do you think this is what you were expecting? Is this more than you expected, or?
I think it was expected. I think Chat GPT gives us the sense that it's not so scary, because when people talk about AI and machine learning, and when I started exploring this and learning, actually, machine learning and stuff, so it seems like overwhelming. But Chat GPT gives us a sense. It's just like it's really just an assistant. It seems harmless and helpful, so I'm not surprised with the numbers.
Yeah, and Yoshi, you think so?
Yeah, I think it was a sharp uptake. I think the interesting thing for me was seeing how that was distributed across different age groups. So as you can expect, I think it was those aged between like 18 to 29 who were the most, I think it was 1/3 of those people within those ages use ChatGPT quite extensively, but also the differences between levels of qualifications. So I think it was seen mostly amongst those who had postgraduate qualifications, which is interesting because if you tried to understand what sort of roles would be using ChatGPT in the workplace more, is also quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you it's over all different kind of age groups, all different kind of skill levels. Even though some are more than others, I think more and more people, and the fact that you have younger people in the office using it kind of prompts that curiosity from other people,
Yeah.
maybe other age groups, other skill levels, to say, okay, that's interesting what you're doing. And I think that kind of snowball effect is starting to happen now, where people are asking those questions and they're saying, right, well, what's that you're doing? Oh, wow, okay, you've managed to save a significant amount of time doing that particular task. Tell me about it. So that kind of organic growth is quite interesting, I think.
And that was holistic, right, across all age groups.
And I think it's almost expected now. It's becoming expected. I think in the workplace that you do this exercise and have that check with Chat GPT, and it's very common. I find myself, and I find other people as well, kind of say, "Well, this is what Chat GPT said," and it kind of gives it more. Okay, so I didn't do much. I just went on Chat GPT,
Yeah.
but it gives it a sense of, okay, I've done my research a little bit. So
Yeah, yeah. And I think it kind of reminds me of what somebody said at a talk I did a few weeks ago, which was, more and more people are using these large language models like ChatGPT as another member of the team, like another opinion, because, we'll ask maybe 2 or 3 people, but let's also get ChatGPT's opinion. And I think that's a safe, kind of really reasonable way of using these tools without just saying, right, whatever they say, it says is sacrosanct, because we know that it's not fully mature yet, and we know that it's not perfect, and we know that it's got flaws. But if you use it in that way, and I think that's what these figures are showing, is that more and more people are using it in that way, then it's still quite a safe way, because you're not just sort of handing off all responsibility to it. You're just using it as another voice in the room. The other thing that occurred to me was that, of course, these stats are what people have said. I bet you the actual truth is higher, because there will still be a lot of people who probably, for one reason or another, won't disclose that they're using it. Maybe because their work policy says they're not allowed to. Maybe they feel some kind of shame around using it, because I've definitely seen that. So I bet you the figures that we got there are actually a lot higher than that.
And interestingly, in the same article, they actually discuss people's likeliness to use ChatGPT for the presidential elections.
Oh,
The trust was actually a lot lower for something like that, whereas if they were using it for something like work, which is really interesting.
Oh, that is interesting. I mean, we can enter a whole different debate there about the presidential elections and how that's going to be impacted by AI. I mean,
in terms of going back to your kind of what you mentioned regarding having AI as a member of the team, the aim of the game is to remove as much bias as you can, right? And I think AI brings that brings that viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that, I mean, going off on a bit of a tangent, Nicki, but because you're based in America some of your time, I believe. What do you think about these upcoming elections? Do you think AI is going to play a role in them? Is it a scary thing? Or?
Oh, well, I think AI, generally speaking, now, from a different perspective, from a risk analyst perspective, I would say it's playing a role in so many things we don't even know about. So if you consider the last elections, analytics was already embedded so much in the last, I would say 2 elections.
Well, that
So
was the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal. That was,
exactly. So just imagine now with AI, but AI is embedded everywhere.
yeah.
We just don't know it in a lot of models, in a lot of things. So anything, I think, wherever there's important, I would say, decisions or important or money, there are AI models all around us that we're not aware of. So definitely.
But
And
Nikki,
so,
just sorry, go on, James.
no, you go, Josh.
So, Nikki, in regards to the elections, then, would you use ChatGPT? Would you trust ChatGPT to kind of understand a lot of what each party was putting across and to get that information in a more concise, readable output? Or would you be worried to some extent that it might change some of the information or some of the discourse?
Very interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I would say, if anything, some people might get annoyed if ChatGPT is really, neutral and gives us all the data. Remember that people are on their social media and their own echo chambers.
Mm.
So if I'm in my echo chamber and all of a sudden there's something, my friend, I'm going to use that, James, my friend ChatGPT, or
Yeah.
my extra colleague who doesn't get paid. So the extra friend who doesn't get paid gives me a more holistic picture.
Mhm.
That might really annoy me. And I might just say, stupid ChatGPT doesn't know anything, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm in
Human
my
nature.
own echo chamber.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's human nature, isn't it? If you get an opinion that you don't like, you'll dismiss it. But I think it makes it harder to dismiss because, we could talk about whether it's got some inherent biases in it or not, but generally it will have a more balanced view than your echo chamber, right? Who will just give you the opinion you want to hear. So,
But also, a good point to mention is also the output is dependent on the prompt that you put in, right? So you could be looking at some level of confirmation bias if you word things in a certain way to get a certain output from the AI.
Whoa.
now,
So you frame your question and then you get an answer you don't like. So you keep on reframing the question until you get the opinion you want, right? I mean,
We're not rational creatures, are we?
oh yeah, not rational creatures at all. No.
you see, that's where you're trying to use human nature to outdo the AI.
Yeah.
I just keep asking it questions until you get the answers you want to hear.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Listen, that I think that's a great kind of topic that we've covered there. But I do want to move on because we've got quite a bit to cover in this episode, and I want to talk about another one. So we talked about OpenAI, which is obviously owned at least partially by Microsoft. But I wanted to talk about Apple as well, because Apple have kind of yet to declare their hand in the AI field. Yes, of course, they've got AI in there. And I thought it was really notable at the last conference that they did, when they did the last iPhone launch. They didn't mention the word AI once. And given that it's the buzzword at the moment, I thought that is really interesting, because there is the danger, isn't there, of kind of riding this wave. But when the wave is over, you kind of look a bit passé. But there was a quote from Tim Cook just the other day. It's in our newsletter. It says, "Later this year, I look forward to sharing with you the ways we will break new ground in generative AI, another technology we believe can redefine the future." And he said that to the shareholders at the shareholders meeting. So it sounds like they're about to declare their hand. And what I wanted just to ask is, where do you think they're going? I mean, what do you think their kind of take on it's going to be, Nikki?
I have no idea. As you said, you can't really miss this trend. Maybe they've already missed this trend. I don't know. So maybe I have no idea if they're going to buy a technology, or have they been working on some secret? I don't know.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, I mean, I think it's one of those things that, as you said, nobody could afford to kind of miss on this trend.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same token, if you don't think you have a competitive advantage, should you go down that route? Or just wait for the technology to become more advanced and then integrate or do something with it. I don't know that,
Yeah.
to be quite honest, way beyond my understanding of strategy.
Yeah, and to be honest, that is the right answer because nobody knows because they're notoriously incredibly secret. But I still think it's quite fun to have a bit of a guess. And
Yeah.
if I was to guess, because I know that there was another announcement from them to say that they'd stop production of their smart car or their autonomous car,
Mm.
which I thought was interesting, and they're putting those people to work on their AI stuff. I think the difference with Apple is they are a hardware company rather than a software company. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of what they're going to do is going to be based around hardware and around their kind of their laptops or their tablets and their phones. But I did read something which I think is interesting, which is saying that they're going to be partnering with Google potentially. So they're going to be
Mhm.
using potentially the Gemini algorithm, which is
Mhm.
Google's version of ChatGPT, to power their stuff. But
Yeah.
it may all be a bit of hype, but we'll find out in June.
Yeah. Well, Tim Cook does mention that Apple Silicon is the best for AI-powered computers, right? So they're confident in their ability. We know that Apple don't play their hand quickly. They wait, but when they deliver, they do deliver quite well.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine they're going to integrate generative AI into a lot of their native apps, right? Because it's what everyone's using.
Well, yeah,
And
exactly.
maybe extrapolating that out to Apple Vision Pro, maybe some form of generative AI using a visual interface.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's
Maybe
what
we'll
Apple
see.
do really well. I think we've all got to remember that they're never ever the first to market. So you think of the iPhone, obviously there were smartphones before that. You think of the iPad, there were tablets before that. You think of the watch, there were smartwatches before that. They're never the first to market. And I think it's quite interesting their strategy, which is they kind of wait and they wait and see what happens and what's good and what's bad. And then they come out and usually clean up. So no doubt they've been watching about this generative AI revolution over the last year or so, and
Yeah.
they've been taking notes. And I think whatever direction they go in will be fascinating because it will mean that where Apple go, normally the industry goes, right?
Yeah, and just two things on that, right? It's because they've got a chokehold on a lot of people. So I did see that the largest American labor union federation was looking for an AI transparency report from Apple as they go into their AI ventures, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because people want to know what we're developing. But the
Mm,
other thing is if they fail to deliver, because
mm,
expectations are going to be incredibly high, right? Like it is with AI.
absolutely. Yeah, interesting times. We'll wait and see for that, and I'll get my credit cards ready because I'm a bit of an Apple sucker, unfortunately. So we'll see where that goes. But just turning attention to the next story now, which it was something that I picked up on around project management, Nikki, and it was around sort of there was a bit of news around project managers having unrealistic expectations with AI. So there was concerns around has this whole buzz that's happened over the course of the last year kind of risen the expectations about what is actually possible compared to where the technology is on its kind of development curve. I think the survey was conducted by the Ireland chapter of the Project Management Institute, so part of the PMI, and they found that 72% of respondents believed that AI had led to higher expectations from individuals who do not fully understand its capabilities. What do you think about that?
I think we're totally confused in the project management world, more confused than others. And I think the reason for that, and I've been thinking about that a lot, is because we've been taught that a project is a one time endeavor,
Mm,
meaning it's a one of a kind. So if it's a one of a kind, why are we even talking about AI?
mm,
Because we're so special. Each project is so special that nothing could ever be reused. So no, projects are not one of a kind. They use different, they're like Legos. You use different pieces of Legos to create your own creation each time. But it doesn't mean that Lego, just an example, can't create pieces that you can take and build a castle with or
mm,
a car. So I think that's why, as project professionals, we're very much confused. So, on the one hand, we have these expectations coming out that we should be prepared for AI. So, what does it mean to be prepared for AI? I say the first thing is to be more data oriented, meaning look at projects as not deterministic, but rather probabilistic oriented. So that will be the first thing that we could actually do. And then we have to understand that that we can use a lot of AI in project management, but it's going to take time until everything is kind of ramping up. So not to be scared of it, just to, get ready one step at a time, I would say.
Yeah, and just pick you said it, just for the for the listeners. Can you describe what you mean by deterministic versus
Yeah.
probabilistic, so that people can put that
So
into context?
although that's exactly what my premise was in PVAR, that a lot of people, we know projects, there's a lot of unknowns, right? But we always say that the project will be completed, I don't know, in September next year. We don't know that for sure, but we never associate a probability with that statement. So are we sure how much are we sure that the project will be finished by September of next year?
Mm-hmm.
Are we 50% sure? Are we 60%, 90%, or whatever? So it's that language and that thinking that needs to change, because we cannot do AI. And I'm saying that I'm just saying nobody could really do AI if we don't understand AI in project management, or AI in general, if we don't understand probability and statistics, because that's how the models work on probabilities, right?
Yeah.
So if we're sticking to a world that we're speaking in exclamation points, then we're not going to get to the next level.
Yeah, and I think it's really important what you said. Basically, even AI, what we talk about, a lot of it is based on statistics and maths and probability. And I think the opportunity for the project profession is taking the guesswork out of those probabilities and basing it on, like you say, on data, on real data. Because, my perception is that you do a project, you kind of got all these lessons that you could learn for things that you thought, let's say, were going to take 12 months, but actually took 24 months for whatever reason. And then you go ahead and you make all the same mistakes again. And because I think human beings, and that's why it links back to this study a little bit, we're inherently optimistic, aren't we? Like when we first think about any kind of project, whether that's a work project or whether it's something that we're doing at home, we're always over optimistic with our gut feel for how long something's going to take, whether that's a journey or whether that's, building a table for the kitchen. So I think what AI can do to help is help the decision making when you're making those kind of assessments on probabilities. Does that
Yeah,
make
and
sense?
and just me on that. So, because the way that I picture it, right, if you could take AI, yes, I think it could help find clarity within your epistemic risk, right? So things where if you have more knowledge, you can understand it a lot more effectively. But when it comes to kind of more random risks, like your aleatoric kind of risks, I think that's where it can't help because it's kind of intangible in that
Yeah.
sense. But one thing I'd like to touch on, James, as well, is when you kind of mentioned about optimism bias. I know I have to mention some of the cognitive stuff here, but what comes to mind is the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So in this specific context, if you have a lack of knowledge or competency within a certain area, you're more likely to overestimate its capability. And that's usually within the self. But if you apply that to AI, we've had a lot of information about how AI can change project delivery, right? And beyond that, and then it can do anything, right? That's how we picture it. It can do anything. So people are now assuming that the teams can be more productive and deliver more with AI, not understanding the limitations that it currently has.
And I think that's a lot to do with the hype, isn't it? It's just that everyone's been hyping up. I mean, the institutions have, PMI have, and the APM on this side of the pond. So there is definitely, as we all these hype things, there's that sort of trough of disillusionment, and I'm sure that's coming over the course of the next few months when people realise that AI is not necessarily the answer to all your problems. But then there'll be a kind of reframing of the position to say, well, actually, okay, this is still useful and it can still help us, but maybe it's not just going to take all of our jobs away like the current kind of hype is saying. There was another interesting stat, actually, Nicki, from the article that said that 70% of project managers expect AI to permanently change the role of a project manager, which is, that's startling that we're at that point now. But I guess my question if that's true, how do you think it would change the role of a project manager?
I think things that the time project managers spend a lot of time just getting the data straight. Okay, just so and writing documentation and doing a lot of things that AI could do. We were talking about that ties into ChatGPT documentation. If most of the document could be automatically written, and just a little bit of completion from the project manager side, so all of a sudden there's the focus could shift to other things, to actually communicating. And so a lot of we're always thinking there's a trade-off between data and soft skills. Always, you have to be more focused on soft skills or more focused on data. So as AI progresses, then there will be, I think, more room to focus on the soft skills of managing people. So I think processes and data will improve exponentially, but there will be a need to address the integrations, because it's going to be a transformation of how people work. So at least for a couple of years, or even 10 years, I know I'm talking about 10 years, so it sounds like a very long time, but it's a significant transformation.
Yeah.
And that will take a lot of focus, I think, at least. Yeah.
And to be honest, I welcome that, because I think, when you're talking about project delivery, whether that's construction or whether that's nuclear or energy or whatever it may be, you still need people to build whatever you're building or to deliver what you're delivering. And I think the fact that we're so ingrained at the moment with trying to make sense of the data, and usually firefighting because of over-optimism and everything else, we neglect the people side a bit. So if what AI does is enable us to focus a bit more on people, then that can only be a good thing, because I think that is part of the reason why projects fail. Projects fail because we're trying to firefight some issue that should never have been there in the first place, if whether it was the schedule or the cost had been estimated correctly in the first place. And it's always the kind of people that gets neglected, because people end up working ridiculous hours to try and make up time, or they end up rushing things and getting things wrong. And that's kind of compounds, doesn't it? It becomes a snowball effect. So I feel really optimistic about it. I think there's going to be like you say, Nicki, this kind of this period where people kind of adjust and get used to it. We're in the hype at the moment, then there'll be like the kind of disillusionment a little bit over the course of the next year, and then we'll steady up, and then we'll start sort of changing the workflows and the way that we work. So I'm quite interesting. The one other stat that the study had was that it said that it found that 46% of project managers felt that AI could reduce stress in the workplace, which I think, goes exactly what you were saying. If we can help the people element of it by using AI, that can only be a good thing.
I find that to be quite conflicted, because they mentioned that there's a demand for higher expectations, and that only 41% are saying that AI is improving project completion rates and delivery times, but equally that it's reducing stress. Now, I would imagine that if those things were happening, I would be more stressed.
Yeah. Well, I think that it is all conflicted at the moment, because people are still grappling with it all, aren't they?
Exactly.
I think it's hopeful thinking with the stress. I think people are trying to calm themselves. I think to kind of say, oh, well, I'll adjust, everything will be okay, and it's going to be less stressful. I will have more time. Mm-hmm. We always think when there's a change, it doesn't matter if it's AI or if it's something else. Whenever there's a new technology, we're always thinking we'll have more time, but we never have more time, to be quite honest.
As they say, work expands to fill the time, so we'll just find something else to moan and stress about, won't we?
Yeah.
That's human nature. Until the robots fully take over, we've still got the humans involved.
Even then, we'll find something to do.
It was. I've read something interesting. Apparently today is the date that Terminator 2 set as when they were talking about the future. So we are officially in the future. I think we had the Back to the Future date a few years ago, and now we've got the Terminator 2 date. So
Got to look in the sky for Skynet somewhere. Just
yeah,
invisible.
you're probably not. Well, with the eclipse that happened yesterday, probably not the best idea. Right. Okay. I mean, that's really interesting study. I encourage everyone to go and read that. We'll put the link in the show notes. I just wanted to move to another story. We've got, the 10 minutes or so left of this podcast. And I wanted to talk to this story around DALL-E. So DALL-E, who again are owned by OpenAI, it's the generative art and photos that you can produce, this text to image solution. They've introduced a new feature that lets you edit. So for anyone who hasn't used any of these generative AI art features, it's basically you put a prompt in, some text around whatever you want, say paint a picture of a bird on a beach, and it will generate a really, really good picture. The problem with it is sometimes it can generate something for you and it's just not quite right. And there's been not a lot you could do with it at the moment. So say, for instance, you could say, generate me a picture of a bird on a beach, and then this generates this picture, and then it's got maybe a bird in the sky in the corner that you don't want there. Up until now, you could try regenerating it, but effectively you're stuck with what you've been given. The latest feature lets you actually go in and edit that. So you can actually kind of pinpoint the part of the picture that you don't want, and then put another prompt in to say, please get rid of this part of the picture. And I thought that was interesting, just again, because we touched on this last week in the podcast about how quickly these tech companies are addressing the so-called shortfalls. So they'll release something, say, in this case, DALL-E, and then you'll get the naysayers who will say, well, it's rubbish because it doesn't do this. And then almost within weeks now, that issue seems to get addressed. And I thought this was kind of very telling and systematic of where this is going, that these AI companies are moving and changing the goalposts so quickly. So it's not necessarily this particular feature that I wanted to talk about so much, even though it's interesting in itself, but more kind of this rate of change and the ability for them to kind of keep refining these models and improving them. I don't know, anyone want to have a thought on that?
I think huge companies are spending huge amount of resources into this. And so on the one hand, it's wonderful. On the other hand, it's a little bit troubling, I would say, from almost, I'm not going to say, that the competition, the barrier, the entry barrier is so high that, that smaller companies can't even play, can't even start playing.
They're not going to be able to catch up, are they?
Sorry?
They're not going to be able to catch up.
No. And that scares me a little bit. I have to admit.
One thing that a lot of these companies are doing is they're trying to get you to work within their ecosystems. So with OpenAI's custom GPTs and a few of the others, they're trying to get you to work in that ecosystem. So everything that you're developing with a lot of these rapids, etc., is feeding their IP as well, right? What they're developing. So that's an interesting point.
But I think you're right, and it's the known suspects that are doing it, because you've got OpenAI, which is effectively Microsoft. You've got Gemini, which is Google. You've got Anthropic, which builds Claude, which is invested in by Amazon. And then the one that I think is different, actually, Nicki, is Meta or Facebook, because they've got their Llama model, but they are making that totally open source. So they're the kind of anomaly in all of this. They're building something and then giving it out. So it'll be interesting to see how that one progresses, because you're right. I think, even though OpenAI is meant to be OpenAI, right, in exclamation marks, it's definitely not. And all the trouble in the boardroom over the last few months shows that this is definitely a commercial venture, and Microsoft want bang for their buck, so that is going to be a closed ecosystem. The Apple one will definitely be a closed ecosystem. The Google one, even they've got their don't be evil tag, that's a closed ecosystem. So, there's some hope in what Facebook does and how that Llama model comes out. But you're right. It is scary, and it's a bit like the internet when it came out. You had the major players, and it's very hard to unseat somebody when they become so dominant in that area. So yeah, I thought that was just watch this space, and I'm sure every week we'll be seeing another progression and another progression. So I'm not sure what are people kind of moaning about now, Yoshi. What would you say the naysayers are saying around these large language models or AI at the moment? There might be the next thing that gets resolved.
I think the biggest thing is that it gives you information, but it doesn't help you execute a lot of actions, if that makes sense. So it can tell you what to do, but it's not end to end, right? I think that's one thing. And I think the biggest concern is all around things like deepfakes, I think. So in the ability to kind of localize some of these changes and edit pictures, Canva do it. I know Midjourney do it. Now DALL-E are kind of jumping on that as well. The ability to edit kind of smaller, more micro areas, I think, is what's scaring people. But it adds to more creativity, right? So I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, you're right. If this is going to enable anyone to create very, very convincing deepfake photos, and I suppose it's the same thing with everything. Technology can be used for good and bad, and if there's people with bad intentions, it's going to be problematic. But from a project delivery point of view, how do you think some of these image generation tools could be used? I mean, just sort of kicking off, I think you could use it for like mocking up concepts, mocking up kind of ideas. We know people are using ChatGPT, but Nicki, have you seen anyone use like the DALL-E or the image generation to help with planning in project delivery or anything?
I have not yet, but as you said, yeah, it sounds like for simulation mock-ups, it could definitely be a good just imagine an architect kind of giving the spec, and then voila,
Yeah, I think that's
for
what
a 4-bedroom in somewhere, in London, in this neighborhood, these are the constraints. This is the square footage. It's from the house is from, I don't know, 19, and then you got, definitely.
Well, that's the logical conclusion, isn't it? And I think at the moment, the DALL-E hasn't been useful to people because it's too general. But even this minor change that they've come out with means that I bet people can start using this now to come up with some of those mock-ups. So this is going to be the start of a journey.
Yeah, I think a big flaw in that, James, though, as well with DALL-E is that it doesn't do well with text, right? So the images you get lack a lot of data behind it. It's just an image, whereas some of the apps such as Adobe, for instance, they build in a lot more robust creative tool, which has got creative filling, alternative ideas, supports with parametric modeling, etc. I think that's where the capability is for the design phases of a lot of projects.
Yeah. Watch this space, as they say. It's going to be interesting, right? Yeah. Right. Well, a few minutes left. I just want to pick up a bit of a fun story that I think is interesting as well. So there was a story about the rock band Kiss. So Kiss have retired, but they have sold their rights to a Swedish company, and I think it's the same company that's done the ABBA holograms. And I found this story interesting because what it said was they've sold their rights to be able to create their holograms, which has been done before, even though it's pretty cool and pretty exciting. But the bit that I thought was interesting is what they've said is that they're going to allow the company to train a model on their back catalogue of songs so they can come up with new songs that are kind of Kiss songs and endorsed by the brand. And I think this is interesting because I think it's going to be interesting to see where this is going, because on the one hand, you've got that happening. On the other hand, you've got a lot of people telling ChatGPT that you can't use copyrighted materials. So there's certain artists now that if you try and clone any, say, lyrics or poetry or whatever it may be, it will say we can't create that. So I just thought this was interesting because I can see where this is going in terms of IP now, and you're going to have these closed IP systems where it's starting with Kiss, but you could see it happening with other bands. You can see it start to happen with artists. You can see it starts to happen maybe with poets. And the reason I wanted to raise it in the project delivery context, I could definitely see this start to happen with architects and engineers. So bit of a fun one, but what do you guys think?
I think it's great. I think it's this is a really, that's a game changer, I think, because it's always, you like a band, there's a brand there. It's just like any other, if there's a Chanel or in clothing, or anything like that, and all of a sudden, you can use that and really let AI create new things that stem from the brand.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful. I think the challenge is going to be that's going to be very interesting. What happens if the input is the brand, right? The input is whatever makes Kiss wonderful, but the output sounds like another band, and then you got a headache because the output is going to say, well, you started out with Kiss, you wound up with Coldplay. I don't know.
God,
So
God will help us all.
yeah, what are we going to do?
And these are the kind of ethical things, the dilemmas we're going to have. So if you're a signature architect, say you're Zaha Hadid, you could, as a practice, you could potentially sell your model to other people who could therefore generate Zaha Hadid inspired architecture. I mean, that is a definite possibility, and they could then start taking a credit or a percentage of income or fees or whatever it may be from. So they start introducing passive income. I think this is an incredibly interesting area, something that hasn't really been focused on, and I think a real thing to watch in our industry. It's always the kind of the music and the entertainment industries that will go first. But again, another one, and I know we said it a few times on this podcast, but another one to watch this space and see what happens there.
The one thing I would mention, though, James.
I was going to say, what we should do is when we get an architect on the podcast, we should ask them that question.
Yes, we should.
Sorry, you were saying something.
Well, I was just mentioning with a lot of these roles within for musicians and those within film, but also architects, right? They like to flex kind of their creative process and their artwork, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we're using AI, what we do is that we can't kind of predict how that artist will evolve over time. So if it's with Kiss, right, they might release one album, another album which is slightly different, but it will still have that Kiss brand. I don't know how well AI can keep that consistency, because we know that AI remixes a lot of input and it gives you different outputs, and you can kind of get a slide if it's creative or more reserved. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see that. And also maybe a revisiting of the Creative Commons, because I don't know how, from when AI has really taken off, how that's been reviewed.
Is it fit for purpose anymore?
Exactly.
Along with so many other laws. Right. Well, listen, guys, it's time has flown by again, so we're going to draw the podcast to a close. I want to thank you, Nicki, for appearing on our show. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and I hope that you come on the show again one time in the future, and we can see how things have progressed.
Wonderful. I had a wonderful time, and thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And just one last announcement again for those who aren't subscribed, please subscribe to the podcast so you get it delivered straight to your inbox. And also don't forget about the newsletter that comes out every Monday. And on that note, that's bye-bye from all of us for this week. And please join us again next week for more AI in project delivery news.
Down the charge.